Our conversation is entitled A Better World, and we're going to be looking at Micah 6. So just to get us started and warmed up to the conversation that we will have today, I require a bit of audience participation. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about your answer to this question. Complete the sentence. The world will be so much better if only... ... Maybe you say the world will be so much better if only there's no poverty. There was more equitable distribution of resources. Maybe the world will be so much better if all government officials in all the world would really seek to serve and not be corrupt and go for personal gain. Maybe some of you would say this world would be so much better, something more personal, if only I really found true love. Maybe some of you, this world would be so much better if only I had financial breakthrough. So I don't know, but please hang on to that thought, because as we start a new year, we all want a better year. We all want a better world. And the good news is, God did not leave us out in the dark. One, like we've sung, God is a good God. God is a faithful God. He's a strong God. He's able to make this world better. He's able to make 2023 the best year yet. And He's laid out some guidelines in His Word, which is what we will try to look at today. And so try to make this message very real for you. I pray that as we leave this place, it's not just, okay, totoo naman yan, but there's nothing that changes in our lives. Our prayers up because it resonates so much, and God's Word is living. It's active. As we go on with our conversation today, we come out truly convinced, God, you laid it out in your word, how this world can be so much better if only we did obey what you say. So we're going to be lifting our conversation today from the book of Micah. And I know it's a very busy slide. The intent is not for you to read every single detail. So this gives us a context of the book of Micah. So Micah is a prophetic book that's found in the Old Testament. It only has 7 chapters. It's a fairly short book. And this was written by a prophet named Micah during the pre-exile time of the Israelites. Some of us might be familiar with the history of the Israelites. They were enslaved in Egypt. And then God had delivered them out of slavery through the wilderness, brought them to the promised land. And since around the time when this was happening, so yung mga Israelites, nakatawid na, they're now in the promised land. You'd expect that they would live lives that are faithful and obedient to the Lord because of just how God has brought them out of slavery. But as we know, the Israelites, just like us, can be very stubborn, are rebellious. And therefore, the book of Micah is given as a rebuke, as a warning to the Israelites, saying that because of our rebellion, you know what? Destruction is coming. We're going to be invaded by Assyrians, Babylonians. We're going to be taken into exile. So if you look at the book of Micah, it follows a pattern, and you see this on the side. All throughout the 7 chapters of the book of Micah, it's a recurring pattern of there's an accusation and warning. Prophet Micah is instructed by God to give words of rebuke, warning, accusation of all their unfaithfulness, and there's destruction that's coming. But the good news is, it's always followed up by a message of hope and restoration. And that pattern continues. In the chapters 1 and 2, it says, you know what, Israelites, in the same way God appeared in Mount Sinai in all His glory, He's going to appear again, but this time to pronounce judgment on all the cities of Israel because our leaders and prophets have been so greedy. They've been stealing, they've gone wealthy through theft and greed, and clearly not obeying God's commands. But destruction is coming, yes, but the good news is there is a hope of a better world. The good news is there will come a time when God will shepherd the remnants of His people. And the pattern follows again a few chapters later. Disaster is coming. Our land is going to be destroyed. Why? Because we're not following the Torah. There are a lot of guidelines given how we're supposed to treat family land. Now, because of corruption, we've neglected it. Warning. But the good news, there's hope and restoration. While yes, our land will be, ravaged, good news is there's going to be a new Jerusalem and there's going to be peace on earth. So I hope, even though this is an Old Testament book, and it's a prophetic book, and maybe the audience was really meant to be the Israelites, we realize why this is a very sound basis for our conversation today. Because as we look forward to a better world, a better 23, just like the Israelites are hoping, looking towards that hope and restoration, there are principles, there are commands, there are requirements that God had already clearly laid out. There's a premise to the promise. We keep on saying that. We don't just want the promise. We can't just claim the promise of God in the Bible without, living by the premise, the condition to the promise. So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And almost like a follow-through, hindi po kami nag-usap ni Tita Barry when we were preparing our messages. But surprise, surprise, we're all in the theme of heart's desires. If you were here last week, she's talked about the desires of our heart will, lead the direction of our lives. And today, sort of like another angle that we will only experience our heart's desires, everything you've said, and I'm not sure what the details are, but at the core of it, it's probably something to do with prosperity. It probably has something to do with peace, with a sense of an identity, with a sense of belonging, of love. All these things, we will only truly experience our heart's desires when we follow what God requires. It's not rocket science. But this has been a message that's been given back to the Israelites, but it's a message that's worth, that we have to be reminded again and again that experiencing real fulfillment of our heart's desires will not come by chasing after the temporary things of this world, by trusting our own judgment of good and evil, of what's pleasurable. But we truly only experience it when we follow what God requires. We're going to just take some snapshots from the book of Micah just to establish that we can resonate with the same desires that were outlined, even though in a very ancient book, it still resonates. In Micah 4:2-3, this is in the portion of the hope and restoration in the pattern. So many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths." Isn't this what we want? We want clarity. We want a clear future. We want, certainty. And almost this is the promise. When you go up and you follow the Lord, he will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. How we wish, for the same thing. God, can you just come and settle the disputes among our warring nations in this world? Can you just come and settle the disputes dun sa power struggle across many countries? This is the same desire and same hope that is being outlined in this text. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. I just love the imagery that this passage is offering us. Turning swords, something that you used to destroy, to kill, turn that into plowshares. What are plowshares? Like you use it to araro, to till the land, to make it fruitful. As a weapon of destruction, to suddenly turn that for something out of fruitfulness. Isn't that what we want? Peace, prosperity, like turn your spears, similarly, spears to hurt, turn that into pruning hooks to harvest. Isn't that what we want? So again, a lot of what the hope that is mentioned in Micah is still a hope that we want to realize. Further down in the chapter, it says, everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. Imagine a world where everyone has enough. Imagine a world where everyone has their own, provision. They don't have to run out. Walang extra rich, walang extra poor. Everyone has their own fig tree, has their own vine. They have their needs provided for, and no one makes you afraid. Isn't this such a hopeful, beautiful picture of a world that we wish we will experience as well? and all the nations may walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Just the sense of security, the sense of identity, the sense of purpose, isn't that what we all long for as well? So just to say, all the messages of hope, restoration, the promise in Micah still resonates. And therefore, in the later chapter, as we jump, when we see what is it that God requires, it is still the same message that should resonate and we should apply in our lives today. So in the pattern, this is the message of hope and restoration. But now we're going to jump to chapter 6. And this goes back to accusation and warning. So the Lord, the visual, the imagery that's being used here, it's like God took Israel to court. You know, hinabla ni God ng Israelites. He had a case against the Israelites. And here's God's case against them. Listen to what the Lord says. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. And he would go on, but clearly there's something that the Israelites have done. They've rebelled, they've disobeyed, and here's God confronting them and saying, what have I done to you? I brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak king of Moab plotted and what Balaam son of Beor answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. We will not go in as much detail, but if you're interested what these two events are mentioned, it's in Numbers 22 to 24, just to see. But this is God just demonstrating, have you forgotten? You know, remember, look back. Why are you turning back against me? Why are you disobeying me? Have you forgotten the faithfulness I've extended to you, your ancestors? If you read through it, that's the whole point. Like, they're rebelling, but why? What did the Lord do to deserve that sort of response? And maybe that's sort of God's message for us today. If we're not living in full obedience to God, then maybe God is also just asking you, anak, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Remember what it was like. Don't even have to look back to the start of your life. Look back to 2022. For some of us, maybe 2022 was the best year ever. Like, you finally gotten your boyfriend, you finally gotten married, you finally bought a house, you've got a promotion, you've gotten your PR. Maybe it was like a breakthrough. And so don't forget, remember how God has been so faithful and granted you favor. Remember, it might have been a tough year, but hey, remember, must have been very dark, but the fact you're still standing today in 2023, that means God was faithful. God carried you through. God sustained you. So no matter what that history is, remember, because for sure as you look back, you will see God's faithfulness. You will see God's favor. And so God says, and almost like a irony or exaggeration, with what shall I come before the Lord? What should be your response then after you've been given all those accusations of unfaithfulness, of not remembering? With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings? With calves a year old? Ito ba yung mag-a-appease kay God? Ito ba yung how to make it right before God? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams? So can you see the exaggeration? Yung ba hinahanap ni Lord sa atin? Thousands of rams as sacrifice. As if hindi pa enough yung exaggeration with 10,000 rivers of olive oil. Is that what God requires, that we may be made right with Him? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Ganun bang klaseng God yung sinaserve natin, that to make right everything that we've done, all the unfaithfulness? Is this what He requires? And this is where we will dive a bit more deeply. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. He's already shown you what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. It's not 10,000 rivers of olive oil. It's not so many thousands of rams. It's not hurting your own child. God has shown you what is good. You know, as we look forward to the hope and restoration, what is it that God requires? He requires that we act justly, we love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And I pray as we look at 2023 and maybe fast forward to December 2023, if you were asked how would you summarize your life in 2023, I pray that for all of us, we'd be able to say, I acted justly, I loved mercy, and I walked humbly with my God. And we're going to unpack these three phrases for the rest of our conversation today. First point is about acting justly. The word justly in Hebrew is the word mishpat. And if you look at the many times, how is the word mishpat used in context in the other passages where it's been used, it's really about upholding the law. It's like when you're a judge, you call rightly, you call what's right, right, and you call what's wrong, wrong. No bribery, no favoritism, uphold the law. And there's a lot of context when you read the word mishpat that is also applied, be just, especially for those who are really helpless, who cannot help themselves. You know, those who are on the fringes, those, the orphans, the widows, those who don't have the power to help themselves. To be just is to look after their welfare and to uphold the law for them because they're the ones easily victimized, taken advantage of. So you might think, okay naman yun, act justly, but I'm not a judge. So I mean, the application of acting justly is limited in my life. The other way to think of justice, even though you're not a judge, you're not in a position to say guilty, not guilty, we can still apply justice in our lives by upholding the law, upholding what's right. Or in other words, justice is doing what's right and righting what's wrong. Now, this is a definition that all of us can apply in our lives. Justice is doing what's right and righting what's wrong. And I'm hoping to just make this a bit more alive. If you're a student, to be just and to do what's right is to choose what's right over what's convenient, is to choose what's right over, small things, small compromises, even though you can get away with it. Example, plagiarism. Many times, your teacher will not know whether you copy-pasted the entire paragraph out of somewhere onto your report. You can probably get away with it, but that's not acting justly. Acting justly is doing what's right. Sino po nakakalala nung time, if you want really cool music, you can use torrents. So it's like when you want to download for free, you use torrents, and everyone was doing it. And mind you, I was downloading Christian songs because I love Chris Tomlin music. So we would torrent the whole album of Chris Tomlin so that in the car, we can play Christian music. It sounded like it's no big deal. Everyone was using torrents to illegally download music. And Elmer finally tells me, this is wrong. We're gonna stop torrents. We're gonna delete every file we've downloaded illegally from torrents because it's wrong. It's piracy. And as a result, we now had to buy CDs. Who buys CDs these days? But the point is, doing what's right will cost you. Technically, I don't think we would ever have gone to jail if we just continued torrenting our music. But it's not just. It's technical. It is against the law to steal someone else's music rights. We're reminded to act justly does not come in big, grand ways. You don't need to be a judge. But check your heart. Are there little compromises where you feel okay lang naman? Wala namang nasasaktan. But justice is doing what's right, period. So I pray that you would check your heart. What does that look like for you to act justly, to do what's right? But the other part I love about the definition of justice is that you also actively right what's wrong. Not because, it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem. Mind my own business. In some contexts, that's true. But if it's in a context of injustice, we have to right what's wrong. Let this quote remind us that as Christians, we need to take sides. And this is in the context of injustice. When there's injustice, take sides. Because neutrality, when you're neutral and when you don't take sides, guess what? You're helping the oppressor, never the victim. So as Christians, it's an active call for us to right what's wrong. We can't just be passive and say, napakalaking problema naman yan, or it's not my problem. I will do what's right in my circle, but if there are issues elsewhere, I'm going to stay out of it. That's not justice. God's definition of justice in the Old Testament was about upholding, helping, advocating for those who are helpless. And that's part of our call today. Imagine how much better this world will be if people started taking sides. Not siding, not being neutral, but taking the sides for justice. In school, they have guidance lessons every week, and one of the topics they've covered was bullying. And their guidance counselor was quick to remind them, in a bullying situation, most people think there are only two parties, the bully and the bullied. Truth is, there are more parties involved in a bullying scenario. There's the bully, there's the bullied, there's the bystander. Bystanders, nanood lang, walang ginawa. That's neutral. Are they being just? No. If you want a bully-free campus, that's what they're saying in school, we can't have bystanders. The moment you see bullying, do your part, whether that's really saying, hey, stop, teacher, somebody did something wrong, but you can't just be a bystander. And there is the fourth character in a bullying situation, very few, and sometimes none at all. It's what you call an upstander, somebody who takes the courage to stand up for what's good. Have a think about your circle. I mean, truth is, even adults, hindi po tayo exempted. I mean, we probably don't bully people by pushing them as adults, but there's still a lot of bullying that can happen even among adults. Gossiping, saying mean things, taking credit for someone else's work. These can be examples of bullying that you might witness. You might just be a bystander. But my prayer is that as we're listening to today and reflecting on Mishpat, what is it that God wants us to do to act justly, we're actually called to be upstanders. So I don't know if in your school that might mean somebody is being outcast, whether intentionally or unintentionally. To be an upstander is to take the initiative to say, hey, come sit with me during lunch. In the office, and again, if you're guilty of being a bystander, the intent today is not to give judgment on you, but to encourage you and say, hey, as Christians, God is giving us the desire and the enablement to be an upstander. But it's really where you are in your circle, be part of the solution. Don't just choose to be neutral. You say, it's fine, I'm not being part of the problem. Now we're learning that's not fine. God is asking us to act justly, to do what's right, and right what's wrong. Second, we're called to love mercy. The Hebrew word for mercy that's used here is chesed. It talks in other translations, most often used as loving kindness. So when you speak of mercy, it means loving kindness. Mga examples ng chesed in the Old Testament, so when David extended chesed to Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, a crippled, Mephibosheth did not earn anything to have a seat at the table, but David extended chesed, loving mercy, loving kindness. Or this is when we studied last year Ruth and Boaz. Boaz extended chesed. Just so much favor, loving kindness. And obviously, even in a lot of the Psalms, the psalmist would talk about how God's loving kindness has been reaching out to us. So that is what we mean when we say we love mercy. And I mean just love, right? The word means crave. Love means it's in your mind. You want it. You desire loving kindness. Like, ganun ba tayo kagigil to give out loving kindness to make this world much better? Hoping to make this come alive, can I ask you to reflect? Looking back at 2022, what was an act of kindness you've received? Just to make you remember how sweet it is to be on the receiving end of chesed. What was an act of kindness you've received last year? I want to, without naming names, for our family, we had some really, really dear friends pitch in, pull their Christmas gift together so that we can get a nice staycation for our family. That was amazing, Kesed. That was amazing loving kindness that we've received from our friends. But it doesn't have to be a staycation, although that was like really amazing. Like we're so humbled, almost like too embarrassed to accept the gift. But it could also be something very similar. I remember when we recently, we've moved houses. For those of you who've moved houses, you know the pain of like boxes everywhere and so tired. And that time we were going to fly to Cebu for a retreat with all the boxes. It was just a crazy, crazy season in our life. One of my friends found out that this was happening. So in the middle of the night, at 8 p.m., there's still boxes everywhere. We got a knock on the door. And then when I opened, here's my friend with a bag of bread talk with 4 pieces of bread. And she's like, this is nothing, but this is your breakfast tomorrow because I know it's going to be frantic. You're going to go to the airport. It's going to be crazy. One less thing to think about. Here's your breakfast for tomorrow. That's loving kindness. I mean, it's just bread. But like talagang, may I cry? Because like, why? This is too sweet. So think, what are examples of loving kindness you've received and just how amazing is it to be on the receiving end of loving kindness? No wonder God requires us to love loving kindness, to love mercy, to be addicted to give it away. Because as we do that, we are reflecting God's character. We are becoming more like Him. And we are making this place a much better world. So to your point, if we want 2023 to be the best year yet, if we want to be in a world that's so much better, we love loving kindness. Maybe a challenge as an application. If you're a family, and this is also something me and Elmer are committing to do, we want to love loving kindness. We want to love mercy. We want to we be intentional about building it into the routine, making sure it happens. How about we do, a 12 acts of of kindness project every month? Let's do something. And these are all things I picked out of Instagram or on Pinterest. So if you want ideas, the internet is not short of ideas to say what you can do. So things like you can bake cookies as a family and give them out to the cleaners in your condo and your HDB. It can be for those of you who go to the office, surprising the guard at the door or the receptionist at your lobby with a random coffee in the morning. I don't know what it might look like, but just imagine how much God can move in us, in His children, if we truly craved, if we truly loved mercy, if we loved loving kindness, if we're so just addicted to give it away. So there are ways to do it. And again, a plug, just last Sunday, if you were here, we've seen the video of our Acts ministry. That is, you don't have to look too far. If you want to get yourself started, be part of giving out loving kindness in this world. Our own church has a ministry dedicated specifically to love in action, to making Christ known in the community. So the next time there's a call for volunteers, please do consider doing that. So a challenge before we move on to the final point for us to think about. What would this look like for you? How will you love mercy? How will you crave loving kindness? And by this, I don't mean you crave to be on the receiving end, right? I mean, of course, we all love that. But the point here is to crave being on the giving end of loving kindness. To crave giving out mercy, especially to people that may not deserve it. I mean, to your friends, but also expand the circle to people who are least likely to receive it. And finally, we've talked about what does God require of us. He's already made known what is good, O mortal. He said, act justly, love mercy, love loving kindness. And third is to walk humbly with your God. Before we speak more about humbly, I just love the word, even the choice of word walk. It's not to marathon humbly with your God. It's not to jumping jack humbly with your God. It's just to walk. It's the daily act, one foot in front of the other, just daily walking. But it's not static. It's dynamic. You just keep walking with God. Faithfulness, one step in front of the other, is what is all that is required of us, to walk humbly with our God. And humbly here is the Hebrew word chana. And surprisingly, when I do a word study, this is only mentioned twice in in the Bible. So one is in Micah 6:8, as we're reading it now, and the other is in Proverbs to show a direct contrast between proud. The proud is this, and chana is this. So obviously, we don't complicate the meaning. It's to be humble, to be lowly. And for me, the image that comes to life so much when I look at this is this photo. To walk humbly with our God is to be like the child in this photo, holding hands with your good, almighty, powerful, faithful Father. This image speaks dependence. I don't think this child can say, wow, I'm so good, I earned my shirt, my shorts. The childlike faith is a life of dependence, knowing that everything I need, He's got it covered. Everything, He will provide. I'm not going to be worried. So actually, an application of walking humbly with our God this 2023 is to not worry. And this goes back to what Pastor Mike preached on the first Sunday of the year when he talked about how do we actually get peace when we don't worry, when we just offer everything up in thanksgiving and in prayer. That's walking humbly with your God, knowing that my dad's got it. If lumiit ng shorts ko, He's gonna get me a new one. I'm not gonna worry. In the same way, if I lost my job, even that God has figured out. If I still don't have a boyfriend now, guess what? God knows what's best for me. I'm not gonna worry. That is a life of dependence when we're walking humbly with our God, knowing that I'm fully dependent on Him. And here's a God I can trust to provide all my needs. This photo also talks about obedience. To walk humbly with our God is to obey. Those small kids insisting on going their way as if they know better. Diba? How silly is that? But truth is, in our lives, many times we insist in our own way, thinking we know what we really want, even if it's clearly against God's word, against His nudging. So now we're reminded to walk humbly with our God. Is God, okay, tug me. That looks a bit dark, but I'm going to go with you because I know you're with me. That looks like rocky path. I'd much rather walk in the paved road. But Father, if you say this is the way to go, I'm just going to walk humbly with you. Because your ways are higher. You see more, your wisdom is infinite, and your heart is good. So I'm going to trust you wherever you lead me. And brothers and sisters, I don't know if for some of you that's in the area of your finances. Maybe you've been managing your finances in the way you think is best. And God giving to you, giving to church, is something I can't afford to do at the moment. No. No, I'm not going to tithe. No, I'm not going to give 10%. But maybe that's God's encouragement for you today, to walk humbly. Say, God, you sure? 10%? I don't know how I'm going to make the ends meet, but I've heard stories of your goodness and your faithfulness. I'm just going to obey. I'm going to walk humbly with you because I know you're the God who I can trust. You're the God who is good. You're the God who's powerful. You're the God who's more than enough. So to walk humbly with our God is to say, I'm small, you're big. You got it. I'm not going to worry about anything that's going to come my way this 2023. I walk in full dependence and I walk in full obedience because my God is a God who's worthy of my trust. So we just round up what we are trying to, what we've tried to say today. And say, if we truly want to experience our heart's desires, a better world in 23, a more prosperous, peaceful, secure things, there are many things beyond our control. But what's within our control is to obey what God requires, and He is a faithful God who brings hope and restoration. I know we've spoken from a book in the Old Testament, and I hope we've also learned as we were studying, all our LDP topics. The whole of the Bible points back to Jesus. So you have to think, fine, through the man, all this made sense, but how does this point back to Jesus? One, obviously, the fulfillment of the prophecies in the Old Testament has been fulfilled because of Jesus. But also, if you want to look at a role model who's acted justly, who's loved mercy, and who's walked humbly with his God, look no further than Jesus. The perfect example, when he was fully human on earth, he acted justly. He kept on healing. Even I'm sure he was tired by his ministry of just, loving mercy, loving kindness. And he just walked humbly with his God to the point of death. And Jesus himself, interestingly, would quote the essence of Micah 6:8 in one of his preachings. In Matthew 23:23, this is the chapter where he's rebuked the Pharisees. You know, woe to you, woe to you. He goes, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. So if you remember what we read earlier, it's not the sacrifices that God wants. It's not the offering. But you hypocrites, you give a tenth, sure. You act as if you're doing your part, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law. Justice, mercy, faithfulness. The same three things mentioned in Micah 6:8. These are what truly matters. If we truly want to honor God in 2023 and the rest of our lives, justice, mercy, faithfulness. Walk humbly with your God. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So even in the New Testament, these are things that's expected for followers of God. Just very quickly, I don't want to send the message as though we could earn our salvation by doing the three things. That's not the context of what we've talked about. We know, as followers of Jesus, it's only salvation by grace, through faith. And we can do all the mercy and justice in the world, but if we don't have Jesus, we will always fall short. So this is not a preaching about salvation. This is a preaching about partnering with God every step of the way. And allowing Him to move, honoring God. We do this because we want to make God happy. This is what makes God happy. We want to do this because this is how God partners with us. How humbling is that thought that the God of the universe would choose to use us, right where He's planted you, to make this world better. I'm sure, it's a very funny coincidence, but if you look at the acronym we just built, the more important matters of the law, LAW, love mercy, act justly, walk humbly with God. If you really want to be a law-abiding follower of Jesus, what is the real law? Love mercy, crave loving kindness, give it out like it's, because it's free. I mean, it is free. It might cost you, but the returns of knowing that you've made God happy and you're blessing others is the return on investment is so much greater. We act justly, we do what's right, and we right what's wrong. And we walk humbly, in full dependence, in full obedience with God.